Welcome to The Favorites, the podcast presented by Bet365. We are part of the Action Network. I am Chad Millman, Chief Content Officer of the Action Network. Today we are joined by a very special guest, two-time Super Bowl champion, celebrated analyst and personality, a man who makes everyone swoon. We will discuss NFL free agency, NFL draft, gambling on the NFL. I will introduce him in a moment, but first I am joined by my co-host, my companion, my compadre, my BFF professional bettor, Simon Hunter. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Chad. Are we talking Oscars today? Or are we talking actual NFL? What are we doing
We're
today?
talking actual
Oh
NFL. By
my
the way,
God.
can I listen? I do want to say that last week on the pod, the most forceful stands we took, I believe, I was very adamant that Zone of Interest was going to win for sound.
I
and
regret mentioning the Oscars. I already regret it.
And I was adamant Emma Stone was going to win for Best Actress.
That's
and
true.
I think we cashed on both of those. But let's get to our guest, because our guest is Chris Long, two-time Super Bowl champion, number 2 overall pick in the 2008 NFL Draft, host of the very popular, explosively popular Greenlight podcast, which he records from his fabulous hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia, generally regarded by Action Network as one of the best, nicest, most handsome ex-athletes working in media today. Also, by the way,
wait till Tom Brady gets in, you can't really compete there.
You know what? We don't even want Brady.
Yeah,
we don't want him.
He's
just going to bring us down.
He's a pretty boy.
Chris, welcome to the show.
Dude, I'm so happy to be on. Let me say this first. I really do listen to y'all's pod. And like somebody asked me the other day, like, what's the podcast you listen to the most? And I got to say, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. And sometimes I draw a blank, but the answer should be y'all show The Favorites, because every week I'll kind of compare what I'm thinking with what y'all are thinking. I just really like the format of the show. I think you guys do a great job. And I enjoy gambling, obviously, but also the Oscars. Okay, sorry, Simon. I gotta tee Chad up for a second. Godzilla -1 won something visually, yes. I think, right?
Yes,
it had to. It was one of the best. I don't want to overact. One of the best movies I've seen in the last 10 years in theaters. It was incredible.
People love that movie. It won, I think, for effects. And yeah, it was one of those movies that everyone thought would be campy and silly, but people actually totally loved.
It blew me away. So, and then the Zone of Interest, was that worth watching? It was good.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Oh, really? Okay.
I gotta watch it. I mean, it's totally painful. It's gut wrenching. It's terrible, but like, it is an incredible movie.
Okay.
It's great.
All right. I'm in.
Every minute we're talking about the movies, we're taking away from Simon getting to talk to you about all things Philadelphia and South Jersey. But I will say what's interesting is, and you've done this, I think, better than anybody as an ex-athlete who has transitioned into media, authentically being interested in gambling. And so how did that transition take place?
Well, I think, like you said it, authentically. I mean, if you like to gamble, it's going to come through in the content, right? Like if you really are, we get approached by gambling groups all the time and books to, be sponsors or enter into partnerships. And we've had partners and, a lot of the times, I could see how this could go south, where it's like, hey, you have to hit all these markers as a former athlete or a podcaster. And, you have to cover a couple of, spreads you like this week, or sides or totals or whatever. And a lot of times you can see that people are kind of going through the motions with that. I do feel badly when I give somebody the wrong side. And I also am living it. So I think if anything, the biggest issue I have with gambling is sometimes it can bleed into the way I talk about a game as an analyst, because I am an analyst first as a podcaster, but there's always that gambling sidebar going on. And I'll be mad at a team, because I'll be like, that was the right side and you guys didn't execute. And that might bleed into the way I talk about the game. But I think people can feel that, people love to have a little something on the NFL, and it helps when they're tuning in and like the podcaster is the same way. But I think it's also fun for fans to be like, oh, the football players are like us when they hang it up. They want to sit there with all the games on, and they've got their fantasy, they have their prop bets, they have their sides they play. I got the teasers, I got the parlays, I got all the dumb stuff that people tell you not to do. It's not just talking about gambling, but it's talking about it in a humanizing way that's like, I'm not perfect, so buyer beware, but I do like to gamble and I will talk about it.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of your show as well. I'm always a Stanford
Thanks, bro.
Steve guy. I
He's
obviously
the
grew
best.
up watching Scott Van Pelt. So if you love Scott Van Pelt, you probably love Stanford Steve. If you're a gambler, that's tenfold. Stanford Steve was kind of the dirty little whisperer on ESPN talking gambling before it was really cool. And checking out your show, my biggest view of you is I think most ex-players, especially guys who like for my group, we do interact a lot with ex-NFL players because they do buy picks. A lot of ex-NFL players want to win money.
Yeah.
Eventually they'll lose it themselves just because they think they have the answers to the test just because they've gotten picks for a little while. And what I noticed was you're kind of learning what to actually do, which you bet unders. I kept talking all year about betting these unders on the show, and I noticed you kind of realized picking sides was tough, and you're like, I'm just going to ride these unders for a little while, and you got hot. I think you were like 10-2 at one point betting unders, and I think a lot of people can take lessons from that where you adjust to what's happening at the time, right? So when you're viewing this, like what biggest lessons have you learned so far betting that early days? Obviously, you're an ex-player. You think you have the answers. Have you learned now betting that you didn't have?
I think I'm constantly learning. I mean, it's like I'll learn things this year that I don't know yet, and this is year 5 or 6 out for me, and I've been gambling the whole time. And the thing is, like, you have to lose. You have to go through the frustrating realization that you might know football really well, but gambling is a different thing entirely. I mean, like you put it in the context of the game, but it's a game outside the game, and it is governed by people that aren't football experts necessarily from an X's and O's standpoint, but they understand numbers, they understand trends, they understand spots, they understand the context around each game. And I think for me, that's the really fun part, like talking to older gamblers who all have theories and ways that they do things, because there's no right answer. Everybody would be hitting at a 60% clip. But there are little nuggets that I pick up from all types of people, like, hey, I got a buddy that's like division sandwiches, things like that. Or, there are people that prefer betting live, like they just don't bet sides before the game. They think it's profitable to get on the live betting. Like that was a phase that I went through where I realized that, like, hey, as a player, an advantage I can gain is watching the first quarter of the game, and especially with totals, understanding what's going to happen as the game opens up, and also feeling the flow of the game from a pace standpoint, which is big. Like that's a thing where I can apply my actual expertise, is like watching a game in real time and hopping on these live totals or sides and betting teams that are down 10 points, taking the more long shot bets. Like as I've gone, I've definitely, like early in my career, I was big on risk adverse things, because you're like, if I'm risk adverse, they can't get me. You're betting favorites at these shitty money line numbers, and you're betting teasers, and you're betting all this stuff that, like, it looks good on paper, but you know how it is. It's like mathematically you're taking on a lot of risk, and eventually one of those is going to bite you in the ass. So learning naturally to like take the plus money stuff, lean in on the totals, and then more than anything, like pace yourself through the year. If I come out guns blazing early in the year, my expertise, the great equalizer, is nobody really knows what these teams are going to look like and how these pieces are going to fit and who's actually the cream that's going to rise to the top. Like in the playoffs this year, I think I was 85% on sides. And I'm not tooting my horn, but what I am saying is by the time the playoffs roll around, I know what's going on, because I've seen a full sample size of these teams playing, and the less games there are, the more you can really focus in. And another thing I started to learn was like the smaller markets, man, like hitting these smaller markets, because the book's not going to be as tuned in on some games that aren't getting as much action. And so also avoiding the chase has been a big one for me. Like I have an alter ego, we call it Chase Long, and we have fun with it, where it's like, I'll never forget my maybe second or third year out, I was down big for the first time. And so what did I do? I waited till Sunday night. I bet Tom Brady against the Saints in a Buccaneers uniform, and I bet a money line huge. And, you know, like what I've realized over the last couple years is that the Saints kind of own Tom Brady.
Yeah, that was
And,
weird.
you know, but it's just trying to eliminate bad habits and be patient, man, because I think that's the king for me is if I'm patient and I'm week 8, I'm looking at my ledger and I'm saying, oh, I'm plus money, I'm good. Like, then I'm going to be a better gambler. But if I'm down a month into the season and you're desperate, that's when you incur a lot of those bad chasey beats. Like, you know, I'll never forget the New England Chicago game where Justin Fields went off. I picked the wrong week to fade Justin Fields and I did it spectacularly. Like, stay out of those situations and learn how to lose. You know, like at the end of the week, if on my app I'm in, you know, I'm in the red, then I need to just stop. And I can look at that 0 on Monday and I'm going to be a lot better gambler than I would be on Sunday night chasing losses.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things is learning how not to chase. Comment and a question.
Yeah.
One, you talk about being an ex-player and being able to understand, and you talk about being an analyst first. I remember listening to you and Kyle. It's fun, by the way. Simon is a hardcore Philly guy. I am a hardcore Chicago guy.
Yeah.
So I like listening to you and your brother on the
Yeah.
Monday live show during the season. It's great. And one of the things you guys were talking about once, it was right before the Eagles were playing the Niners, and the Eagles had just had that game against the Bills. And you
Yes.
had a very specific point about how hard it is to come back physically, and that literally every hour matters when you're playing. And
Yes.
so that recovery time, because they had a late game and then they went into overtime, all of a sudden that recovery time was going to matter. And you could see that on the field that Sunday. Simon and I went in so heavy on the Niners against the
Yes.
Eagles in that
Yeah.
game, partially because of that analysis. So like the
Yeah.
analysis plays into it. Second, but the question is, you were down big. For a guy like Chris Long, what is uncomfortable? What is big?
8 figures in a week, you know?
Eight, 8 figures in a week?
I'm joking. No.
Dude, by the way, I would
No,
still
I'm really fucking around. There's some people who are going to be like, yo, he's losing that much money. No, but like, honestly, you know, some weeks I'm going to be down 5 figures or up 5 figures, you know, and that's just kind of the way I look at it. Like, you know, it's like at the end of the season, my goal, I set aside, you know, mid 5 figures. And I say, I don't want to be down more than this at the end of the season. And if I can kind of just keep an eye on that number and actually gamble responsibly, which is like, hey, if you're down, you don't chase, you know, you keep your units the same as much as you can. You sprinkle in, you have units for different kinds of bets. Like my unit for taking a side is going to be different than betting a plus 350 dog. Like, you know, you just try to stick to a formula. But yeah, like I have been down you know, my entire you know, my entire nut or whatever you want to call it in an entire week, in 1 week. And then that's where you got, like, that's when the crisis starts. And if it's week 7, you're like, damn, dude, I have to pay up to feel like I got a clean slate, you know. But if I know I owe money, it's like a totally different thing. So yeah, I'm never making these enormous bets. Like I'll tell you guys, just because like I probably put 20 on the Super Bowl, you know, like, and I won. And I was up because I was up about that much during the playoffs, right? Because I was rolling. And so like if I feel very confident in something and I know it's towards the end of the season and I'm up, then I'm going to manage the budget a little bit differently, you know? So I'm not one of these people who's like going to the casino and betting $500,000 on a side. I mean, that's like Floyd Mayweather or somebody like that. Like I still have a family to feed. I kind of think about it like if my wife saw my balance, would she make me sleep in the RV? And if I have that, if I kind of have that barometer for like, am I screwing it up? And I think about my wife seeing the bets I'm making, that's kind of like my conscience.
That's why Simon needs to get married, so it can help him better manage the amounts that he's betting on football. I will tell you one thing, though. I know Simon wants to jump in, but when you said 8 figures, I once did a story, I was at ESPN for years, and I did this story about Phil Ivey, who is considered the greatest poker player who ever lived, one of the biggest gamblers who ever lived. And my assignment was traveling around the world on Phil Ivey's private jet from Connecticut to Montreal to Austria while he was gambling in various places. And I sat down with him and I said, how much is uncomfortable? And he looks at me and he goes, 10 million. Yeah. So you could say 8 figures and it wouldn't be the first time that I've heard someone say.
No, but I think the key is, it's like, to me, I gamble. I don't gamble to make money. Like, yeah, I got a stack of cash from the playoffs and the Super Bowl that I'm like, I can do what I want. I got this 4-wheeler I want to buy. Like, I'm going to go pay cash for that bad boy or whatever. Now, I know I can survive a lot worse than that kind of loss. I played football for a long time. I'm doing well. I haven't blown my money. But the reason I gamble is not to for a source of income outside of football. I gamble for a ton of different reasons. Number one, I like to compete. Like, that's it. As I love to compete, I love to feel alive watching the games. And for me, I almost enjoy chasing more than when I'm winning, which is it's a very interesting thing that tells me a little bit about myself. Is like, I like a challenge. And so I almost have to be more careful when I'm up in some ways, because I can just be like, all right, well, and you lose some of the enjoyment. But it's the competitive nature of it, and then it's also the educational nature. It's a big challenge, and saying, like, I can learn this new skill, and it's going to take me years, but I'd like to know the things that Steve knows. I like to know the things that y'all know. And then on top of that, I'll put action on games just to engage myself in the game. Like, I really do pride myself in, hey, if Chicago's playing Carolina on Thursday night in Chicago this year, I'm betting that game. By the way, 2-0 in that game. under easy under. But it's one of those things where, like, if I have a little something on that game, I'm going to be on the edge of my seat till midnight on a Thursday night when a lot of the other analysts are not watching. And that gives me an edge because I've watched everything, even if I had to trick myself into watching it.
As a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by North Carolina's newest sportsbook, Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. And if you're in North Carolina, take advantage of the best sign-up offers at Bet365 and across every sportsbook. A link to all those offers can be found in this episode description. If you're in North Carolina, check out that link in the episode description. Simon, I know you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback off a bunch of stuff Chris said where, a lot of stuff I do. I joke with guys I work with all the time that a lot of my side work in the off season is like Hitch, but for gamblers. Everyone remembers the movie Hitch, where he would try to help people dating. My job is to try to talk to millionaires who all they do is lose money sports betting. And, guys can do really well in the NFL season, and then come the end of March Madness, it's all gone, right? That's the toughest part, is to try to survive that March. And I thought it was funny, a bunch of stuff you were saying, Chris, that I pitch to a lot of people that you can easily do because you have money, is you just get a second cell phone. And that's the move, is you get a gambling cell phone and you put it away from you. If you have a couple rounds with devil's lettuce and you're feeling really good and you're like, yo, this bet's good right now.
Yeah.
That's not a good bet. That's the devil's lettuce talking. So
at 1 a.m, man, it's the worst habit I have, because I work at night and then, like, I'll get in bed and I got my phone, like, all the wrong things to do. Dopamine before you go to sleep. Like, I got the Zen in, I've got I got the app open, and I'm sitting there and sometimes I'll wake up 2 days later and put the same bet in again. And I'm like, what the fuck was that? Like I'll forget I put the bet in at 1 a.m. So for me, it's like avoiding the 1 a.m. Bets, because I think it'd be really interesting to chart myself. Like by time of the day you put the bet in, how do these bets actually play out? That's a bad time to do it.
I would say Chad knows me, even a professional. I'll wake up and I'll take the wrong phone to bed that has my apps on it, or I text the wrong guys, and I won't even subconsciously do it. Especially people know that smoke. You'll wake up and you'll say things to your partner in bed next to you that you don't remember saying or doing. So I wake up and check lines all the time while I'm half asleep. Like I set alarms to do it during the season, and I've woken up to those exact text or bets where it's just like, why did I love Pittsburgh so much last night when I've already had five figures on the other side?
Oh, there's nothing worse than a bad beat where you're like, oh, well, at least like I remember, I think it was, I forget which one it was. It was, it was before I knew Antonio Pierce was going to be the coach and the Giants were going to Vegas. I had like bet that at 1 a.m. one morning, and then I bet it again, like, noon later in the week. And then you
Tommy DeVito on the road, you were sick in the head.
Yeah, I was sick in the head. But like I get in this. Here's a question I have for you guys and I hear you guys talk about this a lot. How do you know when to fade the public and not when to fade the public? Because last year I found myself on the side of the public a lot, but I also knew that I had different reasons than the public. And I think sometimes we get in these oversimplified thought patterns where you're like, or you just fade the public, you fade the public. And, like I want to take that icky stand, like I want to walk out on the plank. But then sometimes, like with the Chiefs, this playoff, I noticed myself on the Chiefs side when it felt like that was the chalky side. But I also felt like if you read online, the perception of the Chiefs, it actually wasn't that high. So it's like, how do you know? And I'll get on Action Network and I'm constantly charting, splits and all that stuff to see if, hey, like there is a pattern as far as like the book winning or the public winning week to week. Or what have you guys found when it comes to, that instinct to fade the public? Is it always profitable? And when are the right times to fade yourself in that thinking?
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it. I think it's a broad stroke statement, right? Where it's like there's a bunch of different factors when we're talking about fading the public. And this is just only for NFL I'm talking, but
yeah, me too.
The biggest thing we're looking for, honestly, when we're talking about fading the public, is we know when me and Chad are stepping in it, and we're trying to talk ourselves not to step in it with the public. Like that Ravens game, that's gonna haunt me forever. That Ravens Chief game. We knew when books were begging for Mahomes money on a +5, something was wrong. Something was broken. And that's how Vegas makes their big wins, right? Like they might take a lot of little stabs on the VIG. They happen to take 50-50 bets on games, but those are their money makers, right? When everyone's on one side and everyone's walking right into it. So that's definitely a clear spot of fading the public. But we talked, the Super Bowl is a different beast, right? Like that's the public and the professionals. If they line up all on one side, is that the public side, or is that just the books about to take a beating? You're right. So it is something to weigh, but I think now the industry, it's just been watered down so tremendously that if the Bears are on the road and only 10% of the people are betting on them, and they're playing against New England Patriots with Tom Brady at the time or whatever, it's like, yeah, there's a reason. It's like no one should be betting on the Bears. They're about to lose by 30 points, and usually they would. So it is definitely about picking your spots there where you just don't blindly do it. Don't just blindly bet fading the public, but it is something where everyone's on this one side. You better believe I'm not crossing 6 figures on the opposite side, because that is scary.
Well, this was also a weird year because the public was so good.
Was good this year.
Such a run, right? Yeah. And so Simon and I had a stretch where we struggled in the middle of the year because we thought we were playing the right sides against the public, and the public the public teams kept winning. And also what happened was a lot of times this year there were public dogs. And what's happening in betting right now is the public is getting so much smarter, and they're understanding a little bit of psychology that is in play with fading public perception and fading your recency bias. So there's fewer and fewer of those opportunities to get on the right side of fading the public, because the public is just getting so much smarter at all of this.
Yeah,
It's really
and I
hard.
think recency bias is an interesting one because generally there are ebbs and flows, and we know that, like, I've been on teams, and you got to watch for the hangover games where you played really well the last week and all that stuff. But I also think, like, when you pay attention to certain teams, like, they're not immune to those swings, but because of organizational structure or the coach or the way they prepare, they're a little bit more bulletproof. And trying to identify which teams are a little bit, that are a little, yeah, bulletproof that way, where it's like, I know that I should, I got to trick my own mind after I watch a team do something the week prior. But there are some teams that are a little bit different, right? And so I'm trying to, I've been kind of charting that as well, and so far no avail. But I do feel like there are some teams though that, because of the quarterback or because of what they have between the ears, they are a little bit more recession proof coming off a good stretch, and it's trying to know when to get off the bandwagon is hard. Like,
What
when are they due and when do I hop off?
you had you told us a story, I think a year or two ago. One of the biggest sweats you've had was,
Minnesota, Buffalo.
oh no, I was thinking Super Bowl national anthem before you had to present
Oh
man
yeah.
of the year. But I can't remember all the details. Sort of explain what happened.
I've been out, maybe it was my first or second year out, but like, when you win man of the year, you're down on the field. And if you won man of the year, like the year before, you're down on the field. And I think I was down on the field to present to maybe Calais Campbell, to like pass the trophy to him. Great guy. Was so excited to do that. But me, like, I'm there Saturday outside the stadium. I'm listening to the sound check, and like, hey, I want to get on it. It's a little frustrating, and you understand why that they cap these props, because it is so easy, a la the Gatorade and that sort of thing. When you saw the odds for the Gatorade bath this year, like, obviously there's inside information that gets out. But I had bet the anthem, and I'm sitting there on the sideline next to Teron Armstead, and this just kind of illustrates the dichotomy between active player and retired player. Is he's looking at me, and I've got a timer on my phone during the national anthem. I'm looking down, I got my hand over my heart, but I'm like peering down, and I don't know if he thinks I got a fucking bomb in my pocket or what. like am I gonna do something crazy? Like, what is this guy doing? And the national anthem finishes, and I win the bet, and I'm just ecstatic. And he's like, man, you're like, you missed playing, or what's going on? And I'm like, nah, dude, I'm betting the anthem. Like, if it goes over a certain time, I win money. If it goes under, I lose the money. And he's like, I didn't know you could do that. I'm like, just wait until you retire. There is a lot you can do that you have no idea about yet. And so I think that's the fun thing. When I was a player, I was always cognizant of gambling, not NFL gambling. I didn't really know the lines like that. Like, famously, when we were underdogs, I just knew we were underdogs because I wanted to look and see, but I never during an NFL season knew what the line was, because obviously there's nothing in it for us, and who gives a shit. But college football, I'd walk around the locker room and try to find takers on little, $100 bets. We'd be out to dinner or whatever, and you got guys that don't understand gambling. So like, a guy might not, he would say, I don't do that spread stuff. I'm like, okay. So I wait until his team's a favorite, his alma mater. And then, I'd come up to that guy and be like, yo, straight up, I like, I like Ohio State this week or whatever it is. And so it just illustrates like the education on the gambling side for players, contrary to, the belief probably in the wake of like the Jameson Williams and Calvin Ridley thing. Like, those are anomalies, guys. That now the difference is, now from when I played to now, is the apps, like, and just the way the leagues really embraced it. So I do think you're going to get some dumb kid every once in a while that doesn't realize he can't bet an app or bet in certain places or bet on certain sports. And that's part of it. And the NFL's got to make examples of those guys. But I think for the most part, the NFL effectively keeps those guys out of the weeds, because I can tell you, it's just not a culture that exists in the NFL. I think more than anything, guys like to play cards and boo-ray and craps. And you've heard about all those games on planes and all that stuff, and the amounts of money people lose. Like, I was never a card guy. I always sit in the back of the plane and I say, hey, y'all, because if I'm going to lose money, I want an experience. I don't want to lose it playing blackjack in 5 seconds. I was in Vegas at the high limit room with SVP and Steve and a couple guys, and I was kind of banged up. But this illustrates the way a guy gave me like a 7 and I stayed. You know, I was playing the day before with Tom Segura and those guys, and they were like launching their vodka, and there was a bunch of them in there, Burt Kreischer, and I'm sitting at their table, and I hit on like 15, and the whole fucking table gasped, like, "What is wrong with you?" And I think it was a 6. And so, like, I'm not a table guy. I'm not. If I'm gonna lose $5,000, I want to sit for 3 hours and sweat it. You know, like, it makes me feel alive. I do not feel alive when I walk out of a casino and I'm lighter, you know?
I agree. I agree with the philosophy. I agree with, that's why I like to bet sports more than casino games.
Yeah.
Simon is sitting here in his Eagles hoodie.
Yeah.
And I know he wants to ask a million Phillies questions.
Dude, fire away.
Philly questions. I think we got to start with the fact that Fletcher Cox just retired.
Yeah.
Simon, do you want to kick off the Fletcher Cox questions, or you want me to go for it?
You fire away, as long as you make sure to bring up that they used to always stand next to each other.
I knew that's where he wanted to go.
There's no elegant way to get into it.
Guys,
it was one of the greatest things in sports.
Dude, I mean, when we first met, I loved the guy. Like, we just hit it off, man. You know, like, I just love the dude, man. You know, you got some teammates who you connect with immediately. Like, Lane Johnson's one for me. You know, like, I talked to Lane yesterday. We'll FaceTime each other every couple of days. Just, hey, what are you doing, man? You know, the whole thing. Fletch was the same kind of guy for me. And where I was in my career, you know, I had never been Fletch, but I used to be a guy, you know, like one of the guys. And now I'm on a team as an aging veteran, and I need this guy, right? For me to have a good stop in Philly, we got to work well together. We got to get along. And so you never know when you roll up to a new team, you eye up the room and you see the personalities. And I got to say this, when I walked in that room in 2017, I knew I had a steep climb to like gain respect and reps and all that sort of thing. But I had the right guys in the room, man. Like, I didn't have to worry about being too much of a leader. You know, I could kind of assume that responsibility naturally, organically. I knew that on the field, because Fletcher is so unselfish and so cool, that like, we're going to work well together. He's going to be unselfish. Like, he's going to run games that help other people. You know, like, a lot of times rushers, they're very selfish. Like, they're looking at that number, and we can be that way because our professional career, you know, hinges on that number. But Fletch was never insecure. Fletch was always, he was willing to help other people. Me and Bo Allen were just talking about this the other day when he retired, because we were together. There's nobody, and I tweeted this, that made people better around him more than Fletcher. And that included me. You know, like, in my 2-year stop, I get very celebrated for being a role player there that came in and did my job at a high level when I was called upon. If there was no Fletcher, it's not the same way. He was just so great to rush next to. He was accommodating. And if you're smart, you know how to eat off that guy. And he never had a problem with other people getting credit. He was old school. When he was in his prime, somebody was asking me about the D-line last year versus the D-line in 2017. And 2 years ago, the contention was that D-line was a lot better. And probably so, but they also had better coverage on the back end. But there was one big difference between that 17 team and the D-lines over the last 2 years, is Fletcher Cox in his prime. And I thought Fletch had a great year this year, and I think a lot of props to him for going out on top because he played really well. But that guy in 2017 was out of the 1990s. And the way the game is today, guys have not adjusted. They've adjusted, and the game's changed. The physicality is different. The body types are different. This guy could have been on a team in 1996 from a run game standpoint, from a physicality standpoint, and the explosiveness to go rush the passer. So complete player, awesome person. And he went out on top. And I got to mention BG too, because he's going to get another year. That was another guy for me that made my life easy. You know, like, I'm a left end. BG can play both sides. He can play inside. He can play out. if I play right end, I look drunk. I go over to left end, and it's not the easiest thing in the world for BG to have to give up his spot, because this is where we're going to be the best with this combination of rushers on third down. But he never blinked. He was always like, you want to rush over here? You rush over here, Chris. I'll rush inside. And we'd run games the same way, or he'd play right end. And he was just so unselfish. So, I think what goes into a great defensive line is not just the players, but it's the connection and it's the personality. And I can tell you when me and Fletcher Cox would take the field, I wanted to go to the limit for him, and he wanted to go to the limit for me, and BG wanted to go to the limit for me, and vice versa. And Vinny Curry and those guys, like, we had a very strong social connection that I think people overlook sometimes when there's a group of personalities, whether it's a wide receiver room or a defensive line room. They might all be great players, but can they click together? And that's the invisibility of trying to evaluate going into a season. This team looks really strong here. But if they're all individuals or they don't mesh well together, or like Jacksonville, for instance, it just popped into my head with the wide receiving core. If they all are slot receivers, then that's going to be a problem. And eventually it's going to rear its head, and it's going to hurt Calvin Ridley's development. It's going to hurt, all these guys' development. So I think the fit's really important, but also the people. And Fletch was one of the best people I played with.
Yeah, and I'll just close the loop with saying, as an Eagles fan, it was sad. It was a sad week. The Kelsey
dying.
news, Cox. Yeah, it's like as a city, we latch to these guys who just work really hard, and every personality here is welcome, from the crazy type of Dawkins to BG, who's just one of the funniest, most big loving dudes ever. But he had to earn it. Like, we did not love him right away. That's just how Philadelphia is, where he was successful, and then now he's our longest tenured vet. It's just funny how things come full circle. So Peter Bittersweet. But you also mentioned Lane Johnson's name, so it's just an easy opening for me to bring up the town of Morristown, where Lane Johnson, I don't know if he still lives there. He used to. I don't know if you know this, Chris. I grew up actually in Morristown, and
my wife did.
Yes, that's the funny connection, where I knew Megan. I was younger, obviously, than her, but she was obviously, your wife is very beautiful. I was like looking up to this beautiful senior who was Joe's older sister.
You know Joe? Yeah, okay.
It made me think of a funny story of Joe, who was 2 years older than me. So you know how it is back in the day when you were in high school. Like, when the older kids would invite you out on an L ride, you would take the L ride. You'd be like, oh, I get to hang out with the older kids. Yep. So I wasn't really a smoker then. Again, I was young. So I was losing my mind in the back of this car. And we're riding around this neighborhood, and we pull up, and who is it but Joe O'Malley shooting free throws in his driveway. And he walked up to the car, hit the L a couple of times, and like had a small talk with the dudes about the party that weekend. And it was like a dazed and confused moment. I was like, these are the coolest people in the entire world. Smoking on their driveway in broad daylight. But it cracked me up when it was like, I can't believe that's Megan. Like, I couldn't believe that was your wife, just because, I have a different perspective. I knew when she was mad young. Yeah. She was obviously a great athlete. So like, you and her need to keep having kids, man. You're having just pumping out D1 athletes right now.
Jay Cutler asked me last night, he was like, yo, who do you think has the best chance of having a professional athlete in the family? I was like, well, Kyle's the genetic freak in our family. Like, it's not even close. Like, the physical ability this guy has. Now, he has 2 girls right now. Now, I think they have a great chance of being professional athletes just off the strength of his geneticism. But I say that my ace in the hole is my wife is like, I mean, she's a dog, dude. like not only is she a great athlete, but she will try to kill you to win. And really, we have gotten in more arguments over like competitive stuff than like relationship stuff. I remember on our honeymoon, we were somewhere and there was nothing to do. So we went out and played tennis, right? Because she likes tennis a little bit. And at that age, it didn't hurt to run around. So we were playing full court tennis because I didn't know the rules.
What is this, college when you first met her?
No, this is like our honeymoon. This is like my 7th year in the league. This is right before training camp. We go to some island and they got a tennis court and nobody's out there. Neither of us really knows the rules of tennis. Now she's really into it, but we played full court, like everything was in bounds, from whatever you want to call those alleys to the little 2 boxes in the front. Like, listeners are throwing up in their hands, but we just played, like, and we'd play for hours, and every game would end in a fight where we wouldn't talk the rest of the day. Like, we'd be up in Montana at my parents' house, they had a little tennis court, and I had to sign a contract and put it on the fridge and make her sign it. And it's written, I, Megan Long, will not take losses. I will stop being a sore loser on vacation. And she had to sign it, and it's still in the fridge from 10 years ago, because literally she would stomp off the court. So I got that working for me. She's a great athlete. I got two young sons, 8 and 5. And then I've got an 8-month-old girl who looks like she's going to get me a scholarship in softball, I'm hoping, or something like that. So, you just hope for the best. I grew up with a dad who played, and obviously there's a lot of expectations and pressure that I don't want on my kids. And, I don't know how much of that I can control, but I can control not making them feel like they got to be me or they got to be athletes. Like, I just want my kids to be good, hardworking, down to earth people. Hey, and if you're going to play sports, you better be a killer. You know what I mean? And you better be a worker. Because that's the way my dad talked to me, was like, if you're going to do this, you don't have to do this. But whether you're going to be a rocket scientist or a football player, I don't want to see anybody outworking you. And that's what I'd like to instill in my kids. And hopefully if I can do that, maybe they'll pay for some of my gambling habits later in life.
They will. And you already gave them the genetic gold mine of you and Megan, man. That's what I'm saying. even if they aren't, right, all you say you want them to be, they're going to be such freak athletes. That's what's,
hopefully.
Again, you hit a home run picking the right woman.
Hopefully, man. That's so funny. That's such a small world thing. But yeah, she was an Eagles fan growing up. And
yeah, I used to call Doug Peterson Mr. Peterson, bro. Like, I knew Drew Peterson. So I knew him as Mr. Peterson before he was Doug Peterson, which is always weird.
Well, Morristown's a great town, man. And Lane does live there. And I come up for Inside the NFL all year this year. And literally the first place I go is I'd have my driver, because I get a driver up. It's a 4-hour drive. I would go straight to Lane's house. And like, me and Lane on Monday nights, like, I miss that. I miss my friends. And like, he knows I understand him, and he understands me. And, watching him sit there at 10 at night and with the treatment stuff on, and he's spending every waking minute trying to get ready for games. It just reinforces, like, you come out of it, you're like, damn, we worked hard. Nobody works harder than Lane. And watching him every Monday night, whether it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whenever I pull up, he's taking like electrodes off of him, or he's got his feet in cold water, or he's watching film with like virtual reality goggles on, like doing 5 things at once. Nobody works harder than Lane. So just awesome dudes, man. And it is hard for Eagles fans because these guys are turning over. Now this puts a lot of pressure on guys like Jalen Carter, in my opinion, who Jalen Carter to me can be a Hall of Famer, like easy. It's up to him. And so for guys like that, they have to look at this as an opportunity and also a responsibility to be the next Jason Kelsey, to be the next Fletcher. You're going to see these guys matriculate, and you kind of lose not only the players, but the leadership.
Well, listen, I wish Jalen Carter had finished out the year strong, so we could have won our Jalen Carter wins Defensive Player of the Year.
He was the best defensive player of the year.
He was great.
But you can't sell that. You can't sell that. Defense is too bad.
We got to let you go, but I think we're going to want you back. We're going to want Kyle. We're going to want to have a Chicago Philly showdown. Plus, we have about 85 trivia questions for you about playing in the NFL for you, your father, your brother. But for now, brother, this was great.
Chris likewise.
Thanks for coming on. Be sure to catch our next episode of The Favorites live on the Action Network YouTube page every Tuesday, 1:45 p.m. Eastern. Download us from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. Rate, review, subscribe, leave us 5 stars, say whatever you want. Feedback is a gift. Until Tuesday, 1:45 p.m. Eastern. Love you.